couple of months ago, David Gelernter wrote an essay in Claremont Review of Books entitled Giving Up Darwin, a fond farewell to a brilliant and beautiful theory. Gelernter is professor of computer science at Yale University. He's chief scientist at Mere World Technologies and a member of the National Council of the Arts. He is also the latest of a small but growing number of scientists and intellectuals who are now studying the evidence for themselves and finding that the case for evolutionary biology as presented by the mainstream scientific establishment is, well, in fact, mistaken. One of the scientists that Gelernter refers to in his essay is molecular biologist Douglas Axe. He is, quote, a distinguished biologist with a 5-star breeding, according to Gelernter, a graduate student at Caltech who then joined the Center for Protein Engineering at Cambridge. Dr. Axe is my guest for the next 2 episodes of A Small Good Thing.
You're listening to a small good thing.
Good thing.
Small Good Thing with Steve Zell.
Here's how Gelernter begins his essay. Darwinian evolution is a brilliant and beautiful scientific theory. Once it was a daring guess. Today it is basic to the credo that defines the modern worldview. Accepting the theory as settled truth, no more subject to debate than the earth being round or the sky blue or force being mass times acceleration, certifies that you are devoutly orthodox in your scientific views, which in turn is an essential first step towards being taken seriously in any part of modern intellectual life. But what if Darwin was wrong? Gelernter continues, like so many others, I grew up with Darwin's theory and had always believed it was true. I had heard doubts over the years from well-informed, sometimes brilliant people, but I had my hands full cultivating my own garden. It was easier to let biology take care of itself. But in recent years, reading and discussion have shut that road down for good. End quote. Dr. Douglas Axe is one of those well-informed and brilliant people that Gelernter mentions, who, back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, wanted to test for himself if Darwin's beautiful and scientific theory could be verified using the methods and knowledge of modern molecular biology in the lab. He found that it could not. In 2018, he wrote a book about it called Undeniable, published by HarperCollins. I got to speak with him in his office in Seattle. He graciously talked to me for a couple of hours, answering all kinds of questions. Because of the length, I've decided to make 2 episodes from our conversation. In this first episode, we talk at length about what the scientific establishment is really like from an insider's point of view. And since Dr. Axe has been a career scientist for at least 30 years, he knows where all the skeletons are buried, so to speak, and occasionally offers some inconvenient truths. So what is the gist of your book? What is it that you wanted to say in that book? What is the core argument that you're making in that book?
Yeah. Well, there's what I wanted to say and there's how I wanted to say it, which are 2 different things. What I wanted to say is that our sort of inbuilt intuition that living things, including us, are designed by a godlike designer turns out to be correct. And you don't have to have a PhD, you don't have to do laboratory research to demonstrate that. You can go through some simple exercises of common sense reasoning and affirm that intuition for yourself. And that played into when I was considering how to write the book. There were kind of 2 options I was considering. One was take technical work that I've done and distill it down and simplify it so that a non-technical reader can understand the gist of it. I was not happy with that because it felt as though if I do that, I'm leaving the reader beholden to the experts. So without doubt, I knew when I write this book, there will be experts who will say that I'm not right, that the Axe, didn't tell you about this, didn't tell you about that. I didn't want to leave a reader in this position, this all too familiar position of having to choose which experts to believe. And instead, I felt as though this is at rock bottom, this is a simple issue that anyone who is caring enough to engage it with their own mind can come to a correct answer and be reasonably certain of that answer. And that way not be, beholden to the experts doing the tennis match, looking from one side to the other and picking your favorite. I was very unhappy with that result. So that's the gist of what I want to say and why I said it the way I did.
The intuition that you're speaking of is the intuition that seems to be borne out by all the data. If you look around, the vast majority of the world, including the Western world, they're not entirely on board with the Darwinian mainline evolutionary biology narrative.
Right.
If you read in the popular magazines, you'll routinely get articles written by scientists. I think they're good-willed and well-intentioned scientists who are sort of hand-wringing or bemoaning the fact or trying to be positive. To basically, they're saying, well, and what they mean by that is we scientists somehow need to teach this better because people aren't believing it. And people are saying, no, I don't believe that. There seems to be some design in that. Yeah. Is that what you mean by the intuition?
Yeah, so fundamentally it is a rejection of the notion that we can be explained by accidental physical causes. And that's not to say that there isn't something true, that is not to deny mutation or natural selection or several of these other technical things. It's to say that none of that ultimately explains how we got here. Someone had to have put us here. That has to be the ultimate explanation. That's the intuition. So I quote early on in the book Alison Gopnik, who's a UC Berkeley psychology professor. She wrote in the Wall Street Journal something to the effect of, by elementary school age, children start to invoke an ultimate godlike designer to explain the complexity of the world around them, even children brought up as atheists, which I thought was very interesting because it's an admission that this thing that I'm calling the intuition, the design intuition, it's there and it seems to be innate. It seems to be in us from the beginning, and it doesn't depend on how your parents are bringing you up. In fact, your parents can be bringing you up to deny that intuition, but the intuition is still there. So you have to do work actually to oppose this thing. But whatever it is, it's clearly not a technical thing, because a 4-year-old looks at a butterfly and knows that it was made by a godlike designer, even if this 4-year-old is being brought up in an atheist home. And they're clearly not, the 4-year-old's not pulling out a calculator, not doing some quick calculations, knows nothing about probability, knows nothing about cellular complexity, just looking at the thing and saying, this is remarkable, the way this thing behaves. I don't know of anything that behaves that way unless something made it behave that way. I think that's kind of how it works.
If we read the popular... the way the popular press presents establishment science, there's this thing called science, and at least I get the impression, I think most people get the impression, science. Well, science is involved with looking at objective facts, and everybody who's a real scientist, well, they're all looking through the same microscope, and they're all looking through the same telescope, and they're just all looking at objective facts, and consequently, if you're a real scientist, well, then all scientists will agree with one another because, after all, science is just about objective facts. But in fact, that is not the case.
No, far from it.
Scientists are always invoked to back up whatever position I have. So a popular one, again, is about the environment and the climate change. So you've got a group over here, you read them in the newspaper, and what is the pronouncement? Well, the Earth is getting warmer. We're in an environmental crisis. We need to be doing something about this. How do we know? Scientists say so. And we all say, yes, well, it must be true. And then there are those who are saying, not so fast. There isn't necessarily an environmental crisis. The Earth may be heating up a little bit, and then how do we know? Scientists. That all of that is backed up by scientists. And the scientists, and then we get into a dogfight. well, those other scientists aren't doing real science. Well, then the other side says the same thing. Well, those scientists aren't doing real science. So, Mike, here's the thing, and maybe you can talk to me a little bit about this disconnect between this popularly perceived idea that science is just the facts. What makes you a scientist? How do we solve that problem?
It's a complicated one.
Yeah, it is.
Two statements that might clarify it, and I use something very close to one of them in the book. I'm not sure I use the other one. One statement is all humans are scientists. I have a chapter that's called A Dose of Common Science, and I coined the phrase or the term common science. It's connecting to common sense, but the claim, I think it's chapter 5 in the book, is that all humans are observers of reality. We all have these mental models of how things work. We all learn from our mistakes, so to speak. So if you're skateboarding, riding a bike, whatever, throwing a ball, you learn the things that don't work and you learn the things that do work, and you're making a mental model and you're refining that model as you get better at skateboarding or swimming or throwing a ball or bicycle riding. That's science. It's observation of how things work. It's doing experiments. Every time I get on that bicycle, I'm doing an experiment. And it's recording, memorizing, remembering key things that are the data from those experiments and refining our model. That's how you get better at riding a bike or at writing a paper, all kinds of things that we do. We're really experimenting our way through life. So in that sense, I think that is the essence of science. We don't call ourselves scientists, most of us, but what we're doing really is science, I'm claiming. So the essence of science, I think, is it starts with a worldview presupposition, and that is something called realism, which is the notion that I am a player inside a world that's real, and it's an objective world. There are things to be learned about the outside world here, and if I learn them, I can convey them to someone else, and we can both observe the same thing. So it's this notion that the outside world is real. So it starts with realism. Most of us don't even think about that. We just assume the realistic position.
There's something there. So the world is objective.
Right. It is not simply that I have my own internal state of consciousness and you have yours and they're disconnected. Rather, we naturally believe that, yes, I'm conscious, you're conscious, but we're both in a world that has its properties, and those properties are real, true, objective facts so that we can study them. That's sort of a starting point for doing science. Then science is simply the art, if you will, of combining reason and observation to come up with a model of the real world, of the outside world. It's that simple. We're simply trying to observe the outside, think about it, think about what we saw when we observed, and come up with some sort of explanation, model that accounts for how things behave.
But scientists disagree. So if they're all looking at the observable world, making experiments and writing it down, why do they disagree?
Well, that comes to the second statement. So the first statement is all humans are scientists. The second statement is all scientists are human. And I focus a fair amount on that statement in the book. I don't know if I use that statement, but I really try to show the humanity of science. And I'm not using that in a pejorative sense, but I am using it in a humbling sense. That science, I think in Western culture, maybe because of the tremendous success of technology, which is not quite the same thing as science, and we can talk more about that. Technology has done wonders, miracles, over the last 250, 300 years. Right. It's undeniable. And I like that word, undeniable. So everyone sees that. That seems to suggest that that science is unlimited, unstoppable progression toward the truth. I mean, we just look at the advance of computers since the 1950s to now. It seems as though everything gets better and better, and science is the thing we think is the thing behind it. And that, I'm not discounting that. That's true. But really, if you look at the messy business of science, you see it's a very human process. Everybody's human as politics, as big business, as law, all these things that when we mention lawyers or businessmen or politicians, we all go, okay, there's good ones and bad ones, but as a whole, it's a pursuit that's flawed, and we've all come to recognize the flaws in these pursuits. But somehow in the West, and I think it's because of this connection to technology, we tend to excuse science from those flaws. They're all there, and if all you have to do is live with scientists and live in a scientific world to see that all the foibles and shortcomings and sort of the pathos that's there in any other human endeavor is there in the sciences. Does it hurt the sciences? Yes, in the same way that it hurts government and it hurts big business. Can science overcome those foibles and make significant progress? Yes, in the same way that these other fields can. But I think the general public has largely been sheltered from the sort of very, very human nature of the scientific enterprise. And the popular notion is that scientists are sort of Spock-like, Vulcan-like creatures that are somehow unlike the other humans. They set aside pride and prestige and wealth and fame. Those things don't matter to scientists because they're a special breed. The only thing that matters to scientists is the pursuit of the truth. And they're not after glory. They're just simply after the truth. Well, get to know any scientist well, and you find that that's not true. All of these things are in the mix. Ego, pride, power, prestige, career, all those things are in the mix for every scientist. No less so than in any other pursuit.
And you know that because that's your business. How long have you been a scientist?
Well, I started really calling myself an engineer and kind of transitioned from engineering.
Yeah, you did. I read in your bio that you started out at Berkeley in the undergrad as an engineer, but then you switched to biology?
Well, I transitioned from chemical engineering to biochemical engineering, and from biochemical engineering to molecular biology. And really, I was well along to my studies when I felt as though I don't want to do engineering as a profession. And it's interesting as I look back on it how my thinking has changed. I was a little bit bugged by the sort of commercial interest, the tight connection to commercial interest in engineering circles. Engineers want to start companies, they want to make money. And I felt as though there was something more pure about, I'm not against making money or starting companies.
Right.
Don't want to be misquoted on that. But I felt as though there was maybe something more pure, intellectually pure, in simply pursuing the truth for the truth's sake. And that's really what made me want to transition from engineering to the pure sciences. I had not been long down that road before I realized that no, this is no more pure than engineering. That it's every bit as sort of money grubbing, prestige grubbing as the engineering circles. And in fact, I came to realize that the one thing you have to grant, as human as engineering is, technology validates itself. So you can think what you want about the person or the team or the people that came up with some new technology. The fact that the technology does what it says it does, if it does, okay, so this isn't true for skin creams, but it's true for launching rockets to Mars, and it's true for computers, all the things that we can actually validate. You hold a smartphone in your hand, it's doing what it claims to do. So they got something right. You have to get something right to do engineering well. Whereas I came to feel sort of on my more cynical days that scientists don't ever have to do anything right. At least in some fields, you could be a very successful, I will have a lot of people disagree with me on this. I claim you could be a career successful evolutionary biologist and not get anything right, virtually. None of your big ideas would be right. You're pushing an agenda. You don't actually have to show that any of your big claims are true. There are small claims that you can show are true. You never actually have to. You're never held to account for your big claims. You can hand wave, tell stories. That's what all your colleagues do. As long as your colleagues love you and pass you off in peer review, you could be a fantastically successful Harvard evolutionary biologist and not really get anything right. Whereas you might also be able to be an academic engineer and not get much right. But if you want to go work for, Elon Musk and SpaceX and send, people to colonize Mars, well, we're going to know whether you succeeded or not. Did we get the people up to Mars or not?
Right.
Whereas it's not so true in the academic world. Academicians tend to quote how many papers they've co-authored, how many books they've written with academic presses, things like that. And those are the facts, but they don't really lead to any real world fact. It's just a stack of paper at the end of the day. So you can spend your whole career on this stuff and never have done actually anything significant. Unlike Elon Musk, whatever you want to think about him, he's not superhuman, we all know that, but he's actually launched some pretty big rockets and he's done some significant things technology-wise. So there's true, verifiable, think what you want to think about the guy, he did this, or he got a team together that did this. So I actually now have kind of gone full circle, and I love engineering and technology for that reason. But I love the sciences too, and I've come to even love the sort of pathos of the scientific endeavor is like so many other human things, that there's a lot to complain about. But if you love humans, and I do, and you love humanity, you have to find yourself even embracing the whole thing. Otherwise, you walk away from it. And I found myself embracing science as a human endeavor, but it's warts and all. It's got as much ugliness as any other human endeavor, but there's also beauty there because we're a mix, aren't we?
But you're talking about scientists, which again I have to ask. But how can people how can they do that? Is there somebody going to call them and blow the whistle? Hey, you're making those big claims there. They don't actually work. Or is that impossible? Is it the sort of science they're doing it's theoretical science? Is that what it is? Why isn't somebody saying, hey, your science actually it's not working?
Yeah, I mean, science is a big umbrella, right? So there's a ton of disciplines, and I'm not saying that everything is true of particle physics is true of evolutionary biology or vice versa. There are definitely, in fact, the bulk of the hard sciences deserve that label hard, in that if you're going to make a claim, your colleagues, you're going to write a paper or a series of papers, we're claiming that this is happening inside, the mouse embryo or whatever. You better back that up, and you better be using techniques that your colleagues can verify. They can go to the lab and use the same, fluorescence microscopy or whatever methods you're using. They can reproduce your results, and they can validate, yes, they were the ones who claimed that this is happening in the cell. We've gone and we're building on that. And
the experiments are reproducible.
Yeah. However, so that is true of a good chunk of modern science. There are these fields, well, I should also say that even in fields where you wouldn't expect it, there's sort of the specter of non-reproducible peer-reviewed science has become a big issue lately. So even in these hard sciences, you might think that every result that gets published, someone races out to reproduce it, but think about it. No one's going to waste their time
and money
and to redo what you did and you got the credit for. Why would I do that? I'm trying to get credit for the things that I'm doing new. So there's a lot, sort of a shameful lot of work that's coming out even in the hard sciences, where the push to publish, the push to put your name on something new, to advance your career, to get the next grant, means you have to publish results that are viewed as successful. And there's no doubt there is it's like Darwinian selection. There is a force, there is a pressure that's there and palpable to produce, to be productive, and a temptation that comes along with it to perhaps cut corners in order to be productive. Because if you don't get this paper out by the end of the year, you're probably not going to get the renewal on the grant, and that will be $500,000 that's lost. So by golly, you're going to get the paper out. Again, you don't want to you don't want to tar everyone with the same brush. The regrettable thing is this is happening a lot, even in the hard sciences. But we started this by you asking how it is that you can have a branch of science where they're real, well, they're PhD level trained scientists who are doing things that are, in the end, are saying things that aren't correct or verifiable. And the reason you can do that is peer review. And yet, it's hard for me to say, oh, here's the quick fix. So peer review is, I can't think of a better idea, but it's highly flawed. And in some cases, the flaws are just, they dominate. So here's a case where the flaws will dominate. If you've carved out sort of a niche field for yourself, and we can make something up here. So, and it can be as bizarre as we want. That we could have a field that is studying the effects of human emotion on sunspot activity. So, and the idea is that what we think on planet Earth somehow affects sunspots on the sun 93 million miles away. Now, if we can manage to get several people thinking this and publishing, spin off a journal, become the experts in this, so that we view ourselves as an internal community. We are the community of experts. Yes, there are people who study sunspots, but they're not connecting it to human emotion. Yes, there are people who study human emotion, but they're not connecting it to sunspots. We're the experts on the connection between the two. You can see how you can have a field that is predicated on complete hooey, complete nonsense, but because it self-defines, it can say, it becomes the cadre of people who determine who the experts are and who the insiders are and who the outsiders are. Okay, so you define your own inside. Now we are a community, and we have international conferences on the effects of human emotion on sunspot activity in various locations throughout the world. We only have 50 people who come to them, but it's a growing community. Maybe in 20 years there's 100 people. But without doubt, we're the only people who are doing conferences on this subject. And so if anyone wants to know what the consensus view of the scientific community is on this subject, they have to ask one of us. And if they ask an outsider who says those people are bonkers, we can say that person is not, they don't know what they're talking about because they're not one of the experts. We're the experts.
They're not an expert.
Right. They don't know what they're talking about. They might know something about the sun, but they're not part of this community. We are the community of experts. So I use this as a tongue-in-cheek joke for you to see how badly off this can get. Once you are a self-credentialing small subgroup, anything, you can get arbitrarily nonsensical in your beliefs, and no one will hold you to account. If the President of the United States wants a paper on what are they doing in this area, it will have to come from that community. If not, it's completely bogus. Everyone will be, up in arms because you've asked a non-expert to weigh in on our topic. We are the experts on this. You should have asked us. And that's where we live in a lot of sciences. So there are areas of evolutionary biology that are legitimate and careful and verifiable. The big ideas can be that nonsensical, and no one will call them to account because they are a self-credentialing circle, a club that determines who gets to be in the club and who doesn't. And it's an official club, and if you want the stamp of this has the seal of approval of the Evolutionary Biology Committee, it has to come from that club. So the club will not condemn itself or critique itself, because that would be, that would be to harm the club itself. And anyone outside who offers a critique or condemnation, then they don't know what they're talking about because they're not in the club.
So
I was going to say the one way out of this, you're not going to end it by the club of experts convening a meeting and saying, well, let's be honest. Are we, full of hooey or not? And they come to the conclusion, yeah, this person outside wrote a compelling paper and we should just give up the club, or we should let this person be the president of the club. That's never going to happen. But what can happen is more and more young people who are smart become more and more skeptical of this club and whether they're actually speaking the truth or just self-deception. And they will do more reading on the outside, and they're free to do that. They're not having to. They're not beholden to the club because they're not pursuing a career where they have to rise up within the club. They're somewhat on the periphery, but they're on the path to becoming well-credentialed academicians in maybe a slightly peripheral field. Once enough of those people grow up who don't buy the position of this self-credentialing club, you have a situation where as people retire from the club, first of all, they're going to lose all their young talent because people no longer think they're doing anything that's worth doing. All the young talent's going to go off to the side and be credentialed in these things that are outside the official club. And then at some point, you have enough people who've retired that you've really eviscerated the old club, and the old club dies because young talent's no longer attracted to it.
Yeah, for example, Gelernter is he's not a biologist; he's a computer scientist.
Right.
But he's smart.
Right. So he's a key example. He's outside of biology. He's in the academy.
Yes.
You can be in the academy and diss Darwinism. You have to do it carefully because if you get your biology colleagues angry enough, there can be repercussions even for a computer scientist, I think. But he's a big guy, and he's brave, and not everyone is as brave as he is. And I'm sure he's getting heat from people for the position he's taking. Because people will say, it doesn't reflect well on Yale, it doesn't reflect well on the institution. And there are people like him and others that I cite in my book. Atheist Thomas Nagel is a good example, who speak the truth just because they've got to speak it, and they take a beating for it. A lot of them do, and I'm sure he is. I haven't heard that story from him directly, but.
And so, in my world of academics, the outlier, the other, the marginalized voice, these were people that we were taught. You need to listen to these people. They're on the outside. And we listen to those voices. And what I discovered, of course, is, they were all for the outsiders as long as they approved of what the outsiders were actually saying. But if the outsiders were in any way menacing some deeply cherished beliefs in the humanities, then the outliers were just nuts.
Yeah.
They weren't outliers. They weren't the other. They weren't marginalized voices. These were wackos, people who really didn't know what they were doing. They were unqualified. So this whole love affair with outliers doesn't actually work.
It tends to be, and I think this could be true in a lot of fields, you love the rebel of the past.
Right.
Okay, so you idolize that rebel a generation and a half ago, 2 generations ago. Darwin, that rebel. We idolize him. But now, you don't idolize the rebels of your own generation. They looked like whack jobs to you. So people like me. So instead of just...
Or Gelernter.
Those are the people who are to be opposed, and you're proud of yourself for opposing them. So it's a very... the people who are saying that, by and large, are people who are surrounded by peers who are patting them on the back for saying that, and they're saying the same thing. So it's mostly people who are speaking not very bravely. They are reflecting the echo chamber of the academy, saying what everyone else is saying, and patting themselves on the back for saying it because it was radical 50 years ago. And it's no longer radical. The thing that's radical today, they hate and are opposing, just the way that people that they say were, they have disdain for the people who were in their position doing their thing 2 generations ago.
Right. So that brings up this question. When you went to Caltech Pasadena and you were going into the field of biology, when you entered there, were you already a convinced Darwinist, or were you already skeptical of the Darwin narrative, or were you ambivalent? So what happened there?
I was never a convinced Darwinist. Certainly by the time I was at graduate school, so I'd gone through Berkeley as an undergraduate, studied engineering. It was really making a connection between engineering and life that was a light bulb going on for me in my graduate studies at Caltech. And I immediately saw the connection. Life looked like it was engineered exquisitely, brilliantly well at the molecular level to me. And that's what made me become interested in studying that aspect of life. As I back up, though, I was not passionately anti-Darwinian at any point, and even at that point, my passion was more to do the work carefully. I was intrigued and convinced just by what I was seeing in front of me that the inner workings of the cell were brilliantly designed and engineered, but I was also motivated to go and test that and determine whether that was the case and whether it could be shown objectively to be the case.
Now, in your book, you relate some kind of eye-opening experiences or whatever you want to call it at Caltech. Because clearly these people are trying to produce, I presume, the scientific establishment. But how do you get through, if you don't buy the scientific establishment idea, how does one become a scientist at Caltech? How do they do that?
You have to carefully step. You don't want, and I've given this counsel to other young people, when you are a student, you need to keep your head low to some extent and get your degree, get your credentials, and then see what you can do. And I did do that pretty carefully at Caltech. I give an example of a test where I gave an answer on a test that put me outside of where I was supposed to be. I was thinking too originally. I got punished for it on a test. But I didn't pick fights generally on that subject. And I just had a sense that it was better for me to not pick a fight and get to a point where the sort of work I could do would have more impact than to pick fights too early. And that's the same counsel I give to young people who are, not at all on board with Darwinism, who are in the life sciences, who want to know what they should do. And sometimes they'll say, should I go find a place where I can do my PhD and challenge the orthodoxy or develop, design-based biology? And I always say, no, just go get a PhD. Get a strong PhD, and then figure out what you're supposed to do.
After Caltech, you moved to merry old England. You went to Cambridge.
Yeah.
You worked, what were you doing there? You did research, postdoctoral work?
Yeah, I went there. My initial appointment was as a postdoctoral research scientist in the Department of Chemistry at Cambridge University, and then I moved to a place called the Medical Research Council Center, which I describe in the book. This very famous, not nearly as old as the university, because it was founded in 1962. The laboratory for molecular biology was founded in 1962. The MRC predates that, but that became a really, really interesting sort of birthplace of modern molecular biology, was that laboratory for molecular biology in Cambridge. It brought together a bunch of Nobel laureates: Fred Sanger, Max Perutz, Watson and Crick. The whole mix was there at the beginning, and just brought a lot of brain power into one place under one roof. Ugly little building, as I knew it, the LMB, but a whole lot of interesting and powerful science happening there.
And you went there, and you were there in England for 14 years, I think it was?
Yeah, in total.
But what were your goals in your work there? And that ended, that kind of tapered off in a certain kind of way. What happened there? Can you kind of explain one on there?
Yeah. So my goal, I saw the first postdoc there at Cambridge University Department of Chemistry as a way to jump sort of formally from the engineering discipline, biochemical engineering, to molecular biology. And I was eager to do work on individual genes and proteins, enzymes in bacteria, in order to address the question of whether random mutation and natural selection could produce a working protein, an enzyme. And I saw this as an ideal system to do that kind of work. So that was my objective when I launched out. And it ended up I sort of arrogantly thought I could achieve that in 3 years and then come back and land a ordinary academic position, having dispatched with Darwinism in 3 years. It turned out to be a lot harder than that. But I did get a good start on it, and that is where I got credentialed in doing work on genes and proteins, molecular biology.
When I read your book...
you asked me about what happened.
Yeah, how did that end? So in other words, you're doing research... Are they happy to see the research you're doing? How does that all work?
Well, for a while they were, because it was, again, being careful. I wasn't publishing papers saying, oh, and this is, the last nail in the coffin of Darwinism. I wasn't saying that. I was drawing out the implications of my work. And as the work became more and more, the results became more and more a critique of this sort of easy explanation of new genes and new proteins by natural selection, it became harder and harder for me to sort of disguise or keep on the low my motives for doing the work. The closer I came to my objective, the more obvious it was what my objective was. And
your objective, what was your objective? Can you say it in a sentence or two? What's your objective?
It was to come up with a definitive test of molecular Darwinism. Can Darwin's theory produce the goods at the molecular level? And I came up with a paper that I thought was the definitive answer to that, and the answer was no. But right as I was about to complete my experiments, but had not completed them, huge controversy boiled over in the UK, and it ended up my connection to intelligent design movement ended up costing me my job at the Medical Research Council Center. Thankfully, I had not completed my experimental work. I was not able to write things up, but thankfully a laboratory position opened up at the Babraham Institute, also in Cambridge, which allowed me to finish my work, get a key paper out that was published in the Journal of Molecular Biology in 2004. And at that point, the money was there. Steve Meyer I'd met at Discovery Institute, and he had raised enough funds for me to bring my family back to the U.S. and to start a new nonprofit, which became Biologic Institute. That was 2004 was the move, and 2005 was the founding of Biologic.
If you are listening to this podcast right now, sitting at your computer, streaming it through your Wi-Fi connection, that's great. Thank you. But just so you know, you don't have to do that. You can download each episode automatically for free to your phone, which allows you to listen to it anytime, anywhere. Just open the normal browser that you use on your phone, if it's Chrome or Firefox or whoever, and go to asmallgoodthing.org/podcast. Then click on whichever icon you find there that you like, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, even YouTube. And be sure to subscribe or follow. That's it. Super simple. On the next episode, I will continue my conversation with Dr. Douglas X. I'm pretty sure you're going to want to tune into that.